Hello, Connecticut, and welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. The title basically says it all. I'm Nancy Barrow, and I will be delving into this new state program and how it can help you and your family. This podcast will give you information you should know about Connecticut paid leave and maybe just a little bit more. Connecticut paid leave brings peace of mind to your home, family, and workplace. Welcome to the Paid Leave Podcast. September is Recovery Awareness Month, and in Connecticut, residents are more likely to die from unintentional drug overdoses than they are in a motor vehicle accident. The majority of these deaths are linked to overdoses of prescription opioid painkillers and illicit opioids, and the big one, of course, fentanyl and now xylazine. Addiction crosses socioeconomic lines, but it can be really financially devastating. It affects the person addicted as well as the families with economic impacts, and finances can really become a barrier to getting care. Connecticut Paid Leave helps to remove that barrier, and it provides up to 12 weeks of income replacement so workers can retain their jobs and get treatment. They can take the 12 weeks in a block or intermittently or at a reduced schedule from work to attend treatments for their addictions, and Connecticut Paid Leave also covers behavioral health visits as well. Connecticut Paid Leave also provides caregiver leave that gives up to 12 weeks of income replacement for family members or people related by blood or affinity that are like family, maybe a neighbor or a coworker or a best friend that are directly involved in their loved one's recovery care. Without paid leave, these caregivers can lose income and even their jobs. My guest is Kevin Shuler, who is a recovery coach program manager for CCAR. And CCAR stands for Connecticut Community Addiction Recovery. And it's sort of like a centralized resource hub in Connecticut for all things recovery. It'll help you navigate the recovery community by connecting you with others in recovery and providing access to area support services. Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be an interesting conversation that we have. Normally, I would start the podcast and ask about CCAR and the programs you offer, and we'll get to that. But I really want to start with your story because your story led you to CCAR. So your story is amazing. And when we talked, I said, oh gosh, this is really powerful and we have to get Kevin on here to talk about it. Do you have a family addiction, a family history of addiction?
Yeah, absolutely. I think addiction kind of runs through my family on both sides. My father actually was from where we are now, the Hartford area. He grew up in a fatherless home in Charter Oak Terrace in the late 70s. And so I think a little bit with his family dynamic and how he was thrown into fatherhood and parenting without those real skills.
Yeah.
And definitely struggling with his own battles. Certainly would have been a trickle-down effect that may have affected me. However, through my work in recovery, I have taken ownership for my recovery first and foremost, but also for the fact that there were opportunities for intervention with my disease or condition of addiction.
Right.
And I really struggled. I struggled for a long time. So addiction for me started at a very early age, probably at the age of 10 with, seemingly innocuous substances like alcohol or marijuana, and probably in an attempt to kind of fit in or really find an identity for myself. And the peer pressure that ensued, I certainly found solace and found some comfort and relief in those substances. What transpired was a pretty rapid progression. And when we saw that prescription pill boom in the early 2000s is when I think my addiction really exacerbated and really started to progress to a point where it could no longer be controlled. And from there, we progressed to IV drug use. And IV drug use for me resulted in some severe medical consequences, some severe environmental consequences, but really it created a separation between me and myself and really the type of person I lost track of who I was and who I wanted to become.
And how old were you when you started, when you went from alcohol and marijuana into IV drug use? It's a big jump.
It's a big
right?
jump. So when OxyContin was so prevalent, that's really where I think I found my drug of choice, and where I found relief not only physically but just emotionally. And that emotional relief allowed me to really shut off my emotions and no longer have to feel the perceived pressures of the world, so to speak.
And so then when you went to IV, was that heroin that you were using?
Yeah, so IV drug use probably followed maybe 3 or 4 years of pretty consistent prescription pill use. And then we saw, obviously, a really clear cut down on supply for prescription pills. So they were no longer as easily accessible as they had been in the early 2000s. So about 2005, 2006, was the first time I was introduced to heroin. And heroin doesn't have to be injected. You can snort it. And so that's where it began. And then, your tolerance increases very rapidly. And so you need more to produce the same desired effect. And I was introduced to IV drug use where I would need less drugs to get a stronger effect. And obviously there was a stigma associated with it and fear that came along with it. But all those fears were kind of subsided with the need to get that effect.
Yeah. And then did it go to fentanyl, or how did that come into play?
So it wasn't like we received notice that fentanyl was on scene immediately. We certainly saw, I think, I want to say, and years could be a little off, but probably 2012, 2013, there was a sharp uptick in Connecticut with opioid overdoses. And that's when there was, certainly there was information that was being disseminated about the fentanyl and the prevalence of fentanyl. But the people that I received drugs from or copped from, it's not like they would tell me this is fentanyl. Yeah. Until fentanyl became the desired drug. Right. Because it was obviously stronger than the heroin that it replaced, and people sought out for fentanyl. And in some instances, and as counterintuitive as it may sound, I would seek out the stamp or the brand of heroin that we would hear produced overdoses, because that was the strongest version of heroin in the street. So if somebody had a specific bag, we'll call Maple Ave. If somebody had the Maple Aves, I'm looking for the Maple Aves. And
it didn't scare you? Like, did people die?
I lost more people than I can count. I wouldn't want to even put a number on it, because I would dishonor the memory of some people that were very close to me who passed away. So yes, a number of people around me passed away. And when you were so engulfed into addiction, and that became my entire world and everything I knew, and I didn't think that there was even life outside of that, nor did I even care to experience it. I was so laser focused on just consistently finding ways and means to get more drugs. That's ultimately what I was looking for. And it wasn't a testament of my character. And through the work and recovery that I've done, I recognize that I wasn't a bad person trying to become good. I was a sick person trying to become well. Yeah. And
that's a perfect way to say it.
Absolutely. And I think I lost hope that the change was even possible for me.
So it went to a place where you were in the hospital, and had you been in the hospital before?
Yeah. So there's a lot of overlap in my story with periods of abstinence, periods of recovery, periods of growth, some really good things that happened to me in my life that were kind of superseded by these returns to use that we refer to as relapses. Mm-hmm. And so I was first introduced to recovery in probably about 2006. And when I was introduced to recovery for the first time, I saw people who kind of knew what it was like to be me from an emotional standpoint, and had found a new way to live. And so they gave me some hope. They gave me some hope that change was possible, and that recovery was real, and that we had the ability to utilize our pasts to propel us forward and to use them as lessons. However, I wasn't somebody who took the change that easily. And so I was in and out of treatment centers for a number of years, and my pattern of behavior would I would do very well when I was separated from the behavior and from drugs, and in an institution, in a treatment center, in a halfway house, in a sober house. And as soon as that structure was kind of removed from me, and I had the ability, or I had the requirement to navigate life as any other adult does, with all the stressors and then probably some wreckage that I created from my recent use, I would ultimately break under the pressure and return to use, which would create another situation with more wreckage and more pain. So my first overdose that I recall was in 2008, and I was in a sober house, actually, so to speak, where I was using, and I was found by a sober house manager, and I was revived with the life-saving drug naloxone or Narcan.
Oh, yeah, Narcan.
Yeah, and I was brought to the hospital, and I was stabilized, and it was a wake-up call for me, certainly, and I think it motivated me for a couple of months until it didn't anymore, and ultimately I would return back to the same pattern of use. What ensued after that was at least 6 naloxone reversals, and some that created some very severe medical consequences. I'm somebody who contracted Hep C as an IV drug user very early on. I had some liver damage. Fortunately, with this miracle drug and treatments that they have today, Hep C has been cured
Right.
and it's been cleared. So I'm grateful for that.
That is wonderful news.
Absolutely amazing. But in 2014, I made a decision to use after a period of abstinence, and I had a myocardial infarction, which is essentially a heart attack.
A heart attack.
I had a condition that is very painful known as rhabdo. Rhabdo, I'm pronouncing it wrong. Myolysis is how I say it, but I think it's myolysis. Rhabdomyolysis. And rhabdomyolysis is essentially the breakdown of muscles in any one of your extremities or limbs that will secrete a protein called myoglobin, which will in turn shut down your kidneys. So it produced kidney failure. So I had acute kidney failure from this condition, rhabdo. So the kidney failure was probably the most severe, but the most painful was the rhabdo. And so the breakdown of muscle in my legs, because I overdosed and I fell unconscious on my legs for an extended number of hours, produced this condition called rhabdo. And I needed to be hospitalized for close to a month. And this was in 2014. And the pain was so extreme and walking was extremely difficult, and I had to be stabilized with different types of medications. And I think the strongest intervention and the strongest treatment I got was from people in the recovery community who consistently came into my room and provided me with just support and messages of hope and a belief that, like, no matter how far down the scale I've fallen, there's still an opportunity to climb back. Where there's life, there's hope. And at that point, I had already lost a number of people who were close to me to drug overdoses, and I recognized that that was not a life I wanted to lead anymore.
Right.
And so I think that's where I put forth the strongest commitment to change, and I really did some strong internal work on myself in a variety of different ways to kind of build up this, so to speak, strong, reinforced recovery that would allow me to function and live life as a normal human being without the use of drugs or alcohol. And as a result of that, life got a lot better, right?
Yeah.
Like I was able to return back to school and hold down a job, and I was an asset to my family, and I was in a healthy relationship. And things were going really well for me until they weren't. And then I actually made a decision to use. And what resulted from there was a very similar experience as I just explained back in 2014. So I had this constant condition with my heart.
Yep.
And in the rhabdomyolysis, it did not come back so severely, but there was damage to my kidneys and liver. And I was in the hospital room, and my partner at the time, who's still my partner today, came into the room, and she's mortified. She had been in recovery for over a decade. She was doing very well. There wasn't really any telltale signs. How could this happen? She's probably looking at where to place blame. Should she place blame on herself? Is she angry at me? Is she angry at addiction? Where did I fall short? Probably trying to analyze the situation when ultimately it defies logic. I made a decision to use when things were going very well in my life. There was no real severe consequences. But she told
Was there a trigger? Or,
in retrospect, there was a few triggers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In very short order, a very close friend of mine lost his life to addiction, and my uncle also lost his life to addiction 2 days later. And I had kind of stopped doing some of the things that had got me to that point.
Yep.
So some of those self-care activities that really helped me get to a place of growth and acceptance and learning. I kind of put a pause on and put my efforts and energy towards other areas. I think we have this desire when we are brought out of addiction to kind of get things back as quickly as we can. And so we can fall into that trap of putting too many things on our plate at once.
Yeah.
And losing focus on putting recovery first. And as a result of that, I paid the consequences. And she told me she was pregnant at the same time. So now I was not having a very stable, great example of a father figure growing up, somebody who did the best they could with what they had, and also recognizing my pattern. And so if I take a look at my history, I don't have much evidence to state that I've shown up for commitment, and I couldn't really beat myself up on that fact. But I made a strong commitment to change, and I knew I wanted to be present in my daughter's life, my child's life. We didn't know the gender of the baby at that point in time. However, I was there. I was present. And it was an amazing experience, and I was clean in recovery, and things were going very well, and I held this little girl in my hand, and I made a covenant to her and to who I perceived to be my higher power, and I stated that I will never, ever return back to the person that I was, and I will never leave her. And 4 months later, I made a decision to use again. And what followed that was unlike any previous experience I ever had in the hospital overdosing. I've overdosed, like I said, 6 times. Some of those instances, it would be a naloxone reversal brought to the hospital, stabilized, and then kind of sent out the door with a piece of paper with a list of detoxes that I should probably reach out to, but no real tangible connection to resources or anything in that regard. However, this time I didn't wake up. I was on life support, and I was in a coma for a number of days. And when I did wake up, it was the most extreme pain I've ever felt, and I couldn't even scream because the ventilator had created damage to my vocal cords.
Wow.
I couldn't even drink water for a number of days, and I couldn't do anything without assistance, and I couldn't move my legs. It was a paralysis with excruciating pain.
Yeah.
And so this was one of the most severe cases of rhabdo that the providers who were treating me had ever seen, and there was really no clear prognosis on what the rehabilitation looked like. But one thing that I did know is that I was still here, and that I still needed to live, but there was a lack of hope. And so those same types of people that I indicated came into the hospital room in 2014, they came back in 2018, and they came back in spades, and they came back not allowing me to feel sorry for myself.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you, is it
Sure.
tough? Is it tough, or do they work with empathy? Because most of the people have been there, right? At least with CCAR, right? Like, was it the people from CCAR who came to you?
In this instance, no, it wasn't people from CCAR. I was first introduced to CCAR in 2009 when I was in a treatment center when a man came in who does outreach on a volunteer basis in the treatment centers, and he really wanted to share the value that CCAR had provided him. And so I was aware of it. I also used in the Hartford area, and I would walk by CCAR some periods of time with no resources, just shame, and knowing that I could walk into that building and probably get some resources and get some hope and get somebody who would meet me with empathy and understanding, but the shame prevented me from doing so. So my mother is a salt-of-the-earth type woman, a phenomenal soul. She worked for the state of Connecticut for over 30 years in a helper role as a registered nurse in a treatment center in Middletown. So she understands addiction as well as somebody could that hasn't truly experienced it. But she was in my bedside daily. She's a strong woman of faith, and so and I admire that about her. She certainly let me know that regardless of what happened, that she was my mother and she loved me, and she wanted to be there for me. And so that was phenomenal. My daughter's mother would come in with my daughter, who at this time was about 6 months old. And so, but just the energy that I felt from her being transferred, sitting on my chest, was incredible, and it was a huge catalyst to change. And so when I was discharged from the hospital after 2 months of hemodialysis and finally able to stand up on my own 2 feet but unable to really walk without the assistance of a walker.
The paralysis must have been frightening.
It's extremely frightening, and to this day I still have some ramifications as a result of it. I don't have full mobility in my leg, but we've made a lot of strides, and I use it as a lot of things, as a reminder of where I could easily be if I make a decision to do that again, as a lesson, but also as hopefully to provide hope to somebody else that regardless of what you've experienced as a result of your addiction, you can still find a new way to live and you can find some growth. I worked in treatment during my stints in recovery, and I would do really well, and I knew that helping people was something I wanted to do, and I would return back to school periodically to try to work towards this degree that would always be interrupted through my periods of use. So over about a 10-year period, it was just this consistent revolving door of using, doing well, and what that did to the people around me, I can only imagine as being just so defeating, where there's so much hope for Kevin's finally getting his life together to Kevin is back doing what Kevin's always done, and then probably some resentment and anger. Well, I know of some resentment and some anger that's justified for sure, but I finally returned back to school, and I needed about 6 credits to complete this degree. And 3 of those credits had to be in an internship in a nonprofit organization. So based on what I knew about CCAR through the outreach efforts and walking through CCAR and being in the recovery arena, I reached out to CCAR, and when I started this internship, I heard of this program where recovery coaches, so trained individuals with lived experience in recovery, were going into hospitals, into emergency departments, and supporting people who were struggling with addiction. And it seemed like a perfect something where, geez, I know what it's like to be a person in the hospital dealing with addiction. After this had been maybe a year removed from my overdose. And so for the past year, I've put substantial work into my recovery. Yeah. I returned to school, and I said, I'm going to apply for this job. It's kind of an act of faith. And I got hired. I got hired in February 2020, and then the pandemic hit. So we mobilized very quickly, and not one person was laid off from CCAR during the entire pandemic. And the program continued to operate in a limited capacity. We actually were unable to go into the hospitals during the very height of the pandemic for about a few months. Yeah. And so it really allowed me to strengthen my skills in coaching kind of over the phone, telephonically.
Yeah.
And when we were able to return back in July of 2020, it was interesting. But I really I felt what was my calling. And I fell in love with going in and meeting with somebody in the most vulnerable place, providing them with conduit to resources, but most importantly.
So you would go into the hospitals.
Yeah.
Did you? And you went into the hospital where you almost died, and you were in a coma. Mm-hmm. What was it like for you walking back into that hospital?
It was an experience that I don't know if I could adequately describe. It was something that probably brought tears to my eyes the first, and I can still to this day. But just what it produced was gratitude. It produced gratitude for where I am today and how I got there through little real. I mean, of course, I've done some footwork, but little work on my own, really by the support of the process of recovery and the support of people who supported that process.
Yeah.
So going back into those hospitals, which I still do today in a different capacity, is amazing, and it really is a testament that change is possible for anybody in my eyes.
And so, how long have you been clean now?
Just over 5 years of consistent recovery. Yeah.
Is that the longest time?
That's the longest I've ever gone with consistent recovery. I believe that my process began in 2007, and it certainly has been nonlinear and it's been disjointed. But I don't want to discount some of the work that was done in the early times.
In those early years.
Yeah, because I think it helped propel me to where I am today, and it gave me a lot of teachable moments.
Was that the hardest part of your of where you were? Is the people that you hurt?
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah. Without a doubt.
And how are your relationships now that you are sober and have been for 5 years? And I think that they see, this is the Kevin we always knew could come out, could be here.
I think the most important conversations I have each day are the conversations I have with myself. Mm-hmm. And so it's really about that self-talk and that narrative that I have internally. And as a result of that, the relationships in my life have improved as a byproduct. The relationship that I have with my daughter is unparalleled. You know, my daughter and myself have a bond that I'm sure many other parents can identify with, but is something that is so incredibly special to me. Mm-hmm. And to watch her develop, and just to know that when I tell her, so my daughter's mother and I separated about 1.5 years ago. It's a very difficult time. Was able to get through it with some supports, and definitely with a lot of introspection and a lot of reflection, and to do it without returning back to what I've always returned back to. But when I told my daughter, and it was on a Sunday morning, and I was packing up my stuff, and I was moving into an apartment, and I told her that I would see her on Tuesday, and I would be picking her up from school, which was very hurtful and hard to do. Yeah. There wasn't a flicker of doubt in her eyes that I wouldn't be there, because she never knew the guy who would say he was going to do something and not do it. She doesn't know the father who would go missing for weeks or months on end. She doesn't know the person who didn't fulfill their commitments. All that she knows of me is somebody that she can trust and somebody who does what they say they're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so my relationship with her is amazing. My relationship with her mother, although there's been peaks and valleys, we're in a place of mutual understanding and some growth and some healing there as well. My relationship with my mother is phenomenal. Even my relationship with my father is one of acceptance and understanding. And so I can't fault my father for his parenting tactics or skills because he never had any.
I think that you're doing really important work. Do you feel like you're doing really important work?
100% without a doubt. I think, and there's testament to that, and there's so many examples that we can see of. I want to take credit for the work that I've been done, but the work that I've been able to be a part of, and to see some of the work that's done not only by CCAR, the organization, but by the recovery community, because it truly is going to take all these resources and all these supports of people who can kind of help destigmatize not only addiction, but certainly recovery.
Yeah.
Right? Because there still is, when somebody comes in to a job interview for whatever role, they may not want to share their success of recovery because they may be viewed as a liability in some instances by a perceived employer. And so we're really trying to help change that narrative, that recovery is something to be celebrated. And recovery is something that is certainly requires work. And people who have been able to stabilize in a recovery are some of the most resilient and strong and just understanding and kind people I've ever met in my life.
Do you see a therapist? And have you been in therapy for a while now?
I certainly have engaged in the therapy process
Yeah.
in so many different stages of my life. I do have a therapist that I connect with, and I certainly will continue to engage with. My therapy process is not one that is maybe as consistent as it could be, but I certainly have different other areas of my life that are sounding boards and people that I gather support from and guidance through. And I also have kind of like a self-help process that I work through, a recovery-focused self-help process that has truly given me a lot of insight and growth and awareness and patterns of behavior and has given me the ability to really kind of shift some of those thoughts and actions and behaviors. And I am a full supporter of the recovery process for sure, the therapy process.
And one of the good things about Connecticut Paid Leave is it does help with mental health appointments. And so if you are seeking mental health and you're in recovery, that's one of the things that we also cover with up to 12 weeks of income replacement, which is, it's vital for someone to change like you said, the behavioral patterns that come with addiction.
That's amazing.
Tell me what you think a program like Connecticut Paid Leave can do for someone who is in recovery or even a caregiver who is helping someone in recovery.
So the program that I see the program that I serve works from 8 a.m. to midnight, 365 days a year. We're in every single hospital in the state of Connecticut. And so last month we saw 615 individuals in the hospital who were seeking some support for their addiction. Out of those 615, about 25% were employed. And one of the things that we hear people say, and one of the barriers to care that they have perceived is, who's going to pay my bills? Who's going to take care of my animals? Who's going to take care of these duties that I have? And it prevents them from really accessing the care that they need, regardless of what that care may look like. And even for the caregivers, we have an initiative on the medical units of one of the hospitals here in the state, where people come home and they are very medically compromised, and they have very little help and support. And the support that they do have full-time jobs or maybe 2 jobs. And so how can they support their loved one if they have to pay bills? So the fact that there's some replacement for that and there's some supplemental support is amazing.
Yeah, I think it's great that Connecticut Paid Leave has those provisions intact for someone who is really in recovery. Tell me about CCAR. Tell me a little bit. You do have these coach training programs, the recovery community centers. Do you also do advocacy work?
Okay, so in 1998, CCAR was actually started as an advocacy organization. So the founder of CCAR was a gentleman named Bob Savage, who had ties with the state of Connecticut, and he recognized that policymakers were kind of making policies about people in recovery without people in recovery at the table.
Yeah.
And so he sought to change that. So he started this organization called Connecticut Community for Addiction Recovery. And really what he wanted to do was, and the questions he asked is, can the recovery community be organized, and can we affect change? So that's what they sought to do. Within a few years, they really gained a lot of traction and a lot of support, and there was a lot of buy-in about this recovery community organization. and what they were doing. So they expanded into an arm or a branch of recovery support services. And they started with recovery community centers. And people from all walks of recovery are welcomed. What would that look like?
Interesting, like you talked about incarceration. What about the underserved community? And how do you guys get to people who may not have ways to get into these community centers?
Absolutely. Very good. Very good question. So the recovery coaching programs have expanded through just about every arena we could think of. So we have coaches in the front end of the justice system in the courthouse. We have coaches in the Department of Corrections. Anybody in any correctional facility in the state of Connecticut can access a recovery coach. We have recovery coaches who work in every emergency department. Our programs are all state funded, so there's no requirement for billing. We don't bill insurance. We don't even care if you have insurance. We help undocumented people. We help people with Medicare. It doesn't matter on insurance type. We also, our recovery centers are low barrier, so you don't need an appointment to come in. You can just stop in. And the question you're going to be asked is, how can I help you with your recovery today? We're also in the process of accessing some vans to kind of get to some of those underserved areas and really bring people into the center. They're truly meeting people where they are physically. We operate in a way of meeting people where they are emotionally,
right.
But now if we can really go where they are physically, and then other outreach efforts and who knows what other arenas we can expand to. But nobody's turned away from any of the services that we provide.
Your sense of purpose, I think, is one of the things that is really important to you.
Sure.
On a daily basis for your sobriety. How, when you wake up in the morning and you look at yourself, like, how do you stay on track?
It's still a challenge. It can still be a challenge. And I've recognized that there's a program of recovery. So program is active change in my attitudes, behaviors, and ideas. So how am I changing on a daily basis? So it really is about a consistent self-inventory that I'm taking. And staying on track means, I have so many good things that have happened to me as a result of this process. And I don't want to give those away ever again. And I don't want to do anything that could potentially tarnish those. So those are like my safeguards.
It's like the pain points. I know that someone told me about pain points, like losing your house, losing your job, losing your family. Some of those pain points keep people in sobriety. Is that sort of when you say you take inventory, is it sort of those things?
Absolutely. What would I be giving up if I made a decision to leave this life of recovery? And the list is astronomical, right? And it certainly outweighs the things that I would be gaining by choosing to return back to addiction. So those are some of the things that help me stay on track. And obviously, I think what helps me the most is when I'm able to get outside of myself and try to help somebody else.
And this new version of you, Kevin, what would you have told the younger Kevin?
That's a good question, Nancy. I think I almost had to go through what I went through. I think I almost did, to get to this place of peace, right? So I might not be happy 24/7, right? But I'm peaceful. And there was always like this internal conflict going on in my life. And I almost had to let that run its course. And I'm grateful that I was able to let it run its course without it taking my life. Certainly there would have been some things I would have changed as a young adult. But I'm not ashamed of the way that it happened. I'm not. So I believe that old cliche that everything happens for a reason. Those things did happen for a reason. They allowed me to get to this place of gratitude. Gratitude for the life that I've been given. Gratitude for what's been overcome. Gratitude for the pain. And gratitude for the purpose that I now have.
Do you meditate? Do you do any of that
stuff? I meditate daily.
Good.
Meditation is a big part of my daily program.
Yep.
Fitness is very big for me as well. I get a lot of, it's not about kind of what I get from that. It's about what I'm able to get rid of. I'm able to get rid of some of that, those negative thoughts and depression and the woe is me attitude. And it really allows me to be focused on the present moment. Meditation for me has had immeasurable benefits, without a doubt. So yes, those are some things I certainly incorporate. Journaling is something that's big for me as well.
And what are you most proud of about yourself?
I'm proud that I didn't give up. I'm proud of myself that even when I was faced with the most difficult experience that I could ever have imagined, physically, that I allowed somebody to help me, and I took that direction and got to kind of where I am today. I'm certainly very proud of how I've been as a father. Like, that is probably the crown jewel for me personally. Professionally, I'm just very proud of the work that's being done by these recovery coach programs in the state. You know, I'm just a small part of it. There's a whole organization of purpose-driven, passion-filled individuals who have the same desire to help, who aren't doing this and it's not motivated by money or any ulterior motive. It's just from a sincere desire to give away what's been so freely given to them. And that's a beautiful thing, B.
Well, congratulations on 5, almost 6 years.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah, thank you so much.
That's really amazing, and continued success to you. And I'm thankful that you told your story. I'm sure that it'll resonate with someone who might be listening and maybe say, geez, there is help for me. Like, there is a future for me.
That's my hope. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Kevin Shuler, Recovery Coach Program Manager for CCAR. Thanks for sharing your personal story with us, and thank you for being on the podcast.
My pleasure.
And let's hope that we can get some Connecticut paid leave. We can work together and we can get some of the information out to people who need it.
Absolutely. I certainly will. Thank you.
To get in touch with CCAR, you can call 866-205-9770, or you can go on to their website at ccar.us. To apply for benefits or for more information, go to ctpaidleave.org. This has been another edition of the Paid Leave Podcast. Please like and subscribe so you'll be notified about new podcasts that become available. Connecticut Paid Leave is a public act with a personal purpose. I'm Nancy Barrow, and thanks for listening.